The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Atlanta as Detective Maya Richardson pulled into the parking lot of First National Bank on Peachtree Street. It was barely 7:30 on a Tuesday morning in late September, and the Georgia heat was already building, promising another sweltering day. Maya had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 8 years, working her way up from patrol officer to detective in the Major Crimes Unit. Today was supposed to be her day off, a rare Tuesday to handle personal business before her 72-hour shift rotation started again on Wednesday. She stepped out of her silver sedan, dressed in civilian clothes, a simple navy blazer over a white blouse and dark jeans. Her badge and service weapon were concealed, as always when off duty. Maya had learned long ago that being a black woman in law enforcement meant navigating two worlds simultaneously, and she'd become expert at reading situations, at sensing when tension was building, at knowing when to reveal her authority and when to observe. The bank had just opened, and Maya was one of the first customers through the door. The interior was all polished marble and gleaming brass, the kind of old money establishment that had been serving Atlanta's business district for over a century. She approached the teller window, her mind on the estate documents she needed notarized for her grandmother's trust. Her grandmother, Evelyn Richardson, had raised Maya after her parents died in a car accident when she was 9. Now 83 and living in a nursing home with advancing dementia, Evelyn needed Maya to take over her financial affairs. The young teller, a woman with kind eyes named Jennifer, according to her name tag, greeted Maya warmly and began processing her request. As they worked through the paperwork, Maya noticed a commotion near the entrance. 2 uniformed officers had entered the bank, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere. Maya recognized neither of them, which wasn't unusual in a department the size of Atlanta PD, but something about their demeanor put her on alert. The older of the 2 officers, a heavy-set white man in his late 40s with a ruddy complexion and a posture that spoke of too many years behind a desk, scanned the bank with an expression Maya had seen too many times in her career. It was the look of someone who'd already decided there was a problem before identifying what it might be. His nameplate read, Officer Dawson. His partner, a younger Latino officer named Martinez, seemed more uncertain, his eyes darting between Dawson and the handful of customers scattered throughout the bank. Maya returned her attention to Jennifer, who was explaining the notarization process for the trust documents. But she kept Dawson in her peripheral vision, a habit born of professional necessity and personal experience. She watched as his gaze swept past the elderly white couple at the loan officer's desk, past the middle-aged Asian businessman using the ATM, and landed squarely on her. Maya felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the anticipation of conflict that every black person in America learns to recognize. She continued her conversation with Jennifer, keeping her voice level and professional, but every nerve in her body was now alert. Dawson approached the teller window with heavy footsteps that echoed on the marble floor. Martinez followed a few paces behind, clearly uncomfortable with whatever was about to happen. "Excuse me, miss." Dawson's voice was loud enough to carry across the bank lobby. Several other customers turned to look. "I need to see some identification." Maya turned slowly, meeting his eyes with a calm, measured gaze. 8 years on the force had taught her to control her initial reactions, to project an authority that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with confidence. "I'm sorry, officer, but I'm in the middle of a transaction. Is there a problem?" Dawson's jaw tightened. "I'll ask the questions here. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. I need to see your ID now." Jennifer, the teller, spoke up nervously. "Officer, this customer is just doing some banking." "There's no problem here." "I wasn't talking to you," Dawson snapped, his eyes never leaving Maya. "Ma'am, are you going to cooperate, or do we have a problem?" Maya's mind raced through her options. She could reveal her badge immediately, pull rank, and end this confrontation in seconds. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the need to see how far Dawson would take this, to understand whether this was simple racial profiling or something more systematic. Perhaps it was the memory of every time she'd been stopped, questioned, or challenged simply for existing in a space where someone else didn't think she belonged. Perhaps it was the thought of her grandmother, who'd marched in the 60s and taught Maya that sometimes you had to stand your ground even when it was uncomfortable. "Officer Dawson," Maya said, reading his nameplate deliberately, "I'm conducting legal business at this bank. I haven't violated any laws, and I don't appreciate being singled out for attention. If you have a specific complaint or warrant, I'm happy to address it. Otherwise, I'd like to complete my transaction." The bank had gone completely silent. The elderly couple at the lone desk watched with wide eyes. The businessman at the ATM had stopped mid-transaction. Jennifer stood frozen, her hand hovering over the documents on the counter. Dawson's face flushed deeper red. "You're being uncooperative. That's grounds for detention." He stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "I'm going to ask you one more time to show me your ID and explain what you're doing here." "I'm banking," Maya replied evenly. "The same thing everyone else in this building is doing." Martinez finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Dawson, maybe we should just—" "I've got this, Martinez." Dawson cut him off sharply. He reached for Maya's arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with us for questioning." The moment his hand touched her arm, Maya's training kicked in. She didn't pull away aggressively, didn't escalate the physical contact. Instead, she said clearly and loudly enough for everyone in the bank to hear, "Officer, you are currently detaining me without probable cause. I am not resisting, but I am stating for the record that this detention is unlawful." "You're under arrest for interfering with a police investigation," Dawson declared, reaching for his handcuffs with his free hand. It was in that moment that Maya made her decision. She had given Dawson every opportunity to de-escalate, every chance to realize his mistake. Instead, he'd chosen to double down on his prejudice and abuse of authority. She reached into her blazer with her free hand, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any misunderstanding, and pulled out her detective's badge. "Detective Maya Richardson, Atlanta PD, Major Crimes Unit, badge number 4721, she stated clearly, holding the badge where both Dawson and Martinez could see it. "You are currently unlawfully detaining a fellow officer. I'm going to need you to remove your hand from my arm, Officer Dawson." The color drained from Dawson's face so quickly that for a moment Maya thought he might faint. His hand fell away from her arm as if he'd been burned. Martinez's eyes went wide and he took an involuntary step backward. You didn't... Why didn't you say..." Dawson stammered, his earlier authority completely evaporated. "I did say I was conducting legal business," Maya replied, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge of steel. "I gave you multiple opportunities to recognize that you were engaging in racial profiling. Instead, you chose to escalate to unlawful detention and arrest." The bank manager, a thin white man in his 50s who had been watching from his office, rushed forward. "Detective, I am so sorry about this misunderstanding. I assure you..." Maya held up a hand, silencing him. Her eyes remained locked on Dawson. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a clear case of an officer allowing his personal biases to override his training and his oath. Officer Dawson, I'm going to need your badge number and your supervisor's contact information." Dawson's hand trembled as he fumbled for his badge. "Detective, we had reports of..." "What reports?" Maya asked sharply. "Specifically, what were you told to look for?" Dawson opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence was answer enough. There had been no reports. He'd simply seen a black woman in a bank early in the morning and made assumptions. Martinez, trying to salvage the situation, spoke up. "Detective Richardson, we were just doing our jobs." "We didn't mean any disrespect." Maya turned her gaze to the younger officer, and her expression softened slightly. She could see genuine remorse in his eyes, and the discomfort he'd shown throughout the interaction suggested he'd known from the start that Dawson was out of line. "Officer Martinez, doing your job means protecting citizens' rights, not violating them. It means having the courage to speak up when you see a fellow officer crossing the line." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But I appreciate that this situation put you in a difficult position. That's something we're going to address." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Captain Morris, it's Detective Richardson. I'm sorry to bother you on your morning, but I need you to meet me at First National Bank on Peachtree Street. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." As Maya explained the basics of what had happened to her captain, Dawson stood rigid, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the air-conditioned comfort of the bank. Martinez shifted his weight from foot to foot, his earlier confidence completely gone. When Maya ended the call, she turned back to the officers. "Captain Morris will be here in 15 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to complete my banking transaction, and you two are going to wait right here. Do not leave this bank. Do not discuss this incident with each other or anyone else. Do you understand?" Both officers nodded, Dawson barely managing to get the word "yes" out of his tight throat. Maya returned to the teller window, where Jennifer still stood frozen in shock. "I'm so sorry about all that, Jennifer. Can we continue with the notarization?" Jennifer blinked several times, then seemed to shake herself back to the present. "Of course, Detective, I'm sorry that happened to you. Unfortunately, it's not the first time, and it probably won't be the last," Maya said with a sad smile. "But I appreciate your support earlier when you tried to tell Officer Dawson I was just a customer." As Jennifer completed the paperwork, Maya felt the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by the familiar exhaustion that came with these confrontations. She thought about her grandmother, about the stories Evelyn had told of sitting at whites-only lunch counters, of being arrested for demanding her rights, of facing down police officers who saw her as less than human. Maya had hoped that by joining law enforcement, by being part of the system, she could help change things from within. Days like this reminded her how much work still needed to be done. The documents were finally notarized and filed. Maya thanked Jennifer and turned just as Captain Thomas Morris entered the bank. He was a black man in his late 50s, with close-cropped silver hair, and the bearing of someone who had spent 35 years navigating the complexities of being a black officer in the South. He'd been Maya's mentor since she joined Major Crimes, and she'd learned more from him about balancing justice with politics than from anyone else in her career. Morris took in the scene with a practiced eye, noting the two uniformed officers standing uncomfortably near the entrance, the scattered customers who were pretending not to watch, and Maya's controlled but clearly angry posture. "Detective Richardson," he greeted her formally, acknowledging with his tone that this was official business. "Walk me through what happened." Maya recounted the incident clearly and precisely, noting the timeline, Dawson's statements, his physical contact, and his attempt to arrest her. Martinez stood, pale and silent, while Dawson's color went from red to white and back again as the full weight of his actions became clear. When Maya finished, Morris turned to Dawson. "Officer, is Detective Richardson's account accurate?" Dawson swallowed hard. "Sir, I thought she looked suspicious. I was trying to protect the bank." "Suspicious," Morris repeated, his voice flat. "What specifically about Detective Richardson's behavior was suspicious?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Dawson's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Everyone in the bank knew the answer he couldn't say aloud. "Officer Martinez," Morris turned to the younger man, "what was your assessment of the situation?" Martinez straightened slightly, seeming to find some courage. "Sir, I didn't see anything suspicious about the detective's behavior. She was just conducting business at the bank. I tried to suggest to Officer Dawson that we should leave, but—" He trailed off, unwilling to throw his partner completely under the bus. Morris nodded slowly. "I see. Officer Dawson, you are being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full internal affairs investigation. You will surrender your badge and weapon to me right now." Dawson's eyes went wide. "Captain, you can't—" "I absolutely can, and I am." Morris cut him off sharply. "You racially profiled a fellow officer, unlawfully detained her, physically grabbed her without cause, and attempted to make a false arrest. You're lucky that Detective Richardson is professional enough not to have you arrested on the spot, because that would be well within her rights." The weight of those words seemed to finally break through Dawson's denial. His hands shook as he removed his badge and weapon, handing them to Morris with the defeated air of a man who knew his career was likely over. "Officer Martinez," Morris continued, his tone slightly less harsh, "you will also be subject to review for failure to intervene when you witnessed your partner violating a citizen's rights. However, I note that you did attempt to redirect Officer Dawson, and you showed appropriate concern during the incident. That will be taken into account." Martinez nodded, relief and shame warring on his young face. "Yes, sir, I understand, sir." Morris turned to the bank manager, who had been hovering anxiously nearby. "I assume the bank has security cameras that captured this entire incident." "Yes, Captain," the manager said quickly. "I've already instructed our security team to preserve all footage from the past hour, whatever you need." "Good. We'll be sending someone to collect that footage within the hour." Morris made a note in the small notebook he'd pulled from his jacket. "If any customers who witnessed this incident are willing to provide statements, we'd appreciate their cooperation." The elderly couple at the loan desk stepped forward. "We saw everything," the woman said, her voice firm despite her age. "That officer had no reason to bother that young woman. It was disgraceful." Her husband nodded vigorously. "We'd be happy to give statements. This kind of behavior is unacceptable." Even the businessman from the ATM approached. "I got some of it on my phone," he said, holding up his device. "I started recording when I saw things getting heated. I can send you the file if it would help." Maya felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger at the situation, gratitude for these strangers' willingness to stand up for what was right, and a deep, bone-deep weariness at having to fight this battle again. Morris collected contact information from the witnesses, then turned back to Maya. "Detective, I know this is your day off, but I'm going to need you to come to the station to file a formal complaint. We need to document everything while it's fresh." Maya nodded. "I understand, Captain. Just give me a moment to put these documents in my car." As she walked out into the bright Atlanta morning, the heat hit her like a wall. She placed her grandmother's trust documents carefully in her briefcase, then leaned against her car for a moment, letting herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Her phone buzzed with a text from her partner, Detective James Chen. "Heard what happened at the bank. You okay?" Maya smiled slightly. News traveled fast in the department. She typed back quickly. "I'm fine. Heading to the station now. See you Wednesday." Another text came through, this time from her best friend, Dr. Aisha Williams, who worked at Grady Memorial Hospital. "Girl, tell me you didn't just get arrested on your day off." Despite everything, Maya laughed. Aisha always knew how to find the absurdity in even the worst situations. "Didn't get arrested. Almost did, though. I'll call you later." She straightened her blazer, took a deep breath of the humid Atlanta air, and got back in her car. As she drove toward the precinct, her mind was already turning to what came next. The formal complaint, the internal affairs investigation, the inevitable media attention when word got out. She thought about her grandmother's words, spoken so many times over the years that they were etched into Maya's soul. Baby girl, doing right ain't always easy, and it ain't always pretty, but you do it anyway, because somebody has to. The precinct was buzzing with the usual mid-morning activity when Maya arrived. She could feel eyes following her as she walked through the building, could sense that word of the incident had already spread through the department grapevine. Some of those looks were sympathetic, some curious, and a few were hostile. The latter bothered her less than they once had. She'd learned that not everyone in blue was on the same side, that the badge didn't automatically make someone an ally. Captain Morris's office was on the 3rd floor, a corner space with windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. Maya had spent countless hours in this office over the years, getting advice, receiving assignments, and occasionally getting chewed out when she'd pushed too hard on a case. Today felt different, though. Today, she wasn't here as a detective working a case. She was here as a victim of the very system she'd sworn to uphold. Morris was already at his desk when she knocked. "Come in, Maya." Close the door. The use of her first name told her this was going to be one of their real conversations, the kind where he dropped the rank formality and spoke to her as the mentor he'd been since her first day in major crimes. "How are you really doing?" he asked once she was seated. Maya considered the question. "Honestly, I'm angry. I'm tired. And I'm wondering what the point is of being one of the good guys when even the badge doesn't protect me from this kind of ignorance." Morris leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "I wish I could tell you it gets easier, that things are better than they were when I started 35 years ago. And in some ways they are. We have more officers of color, more women in the ranks, more training on bias and de-escalation, but incidents like this morning remind us how far we still have to go." "Dawson's been on the force for what, 20 years?" Maya asked. "How does someone go that long without learning basic human decency?" "Because the system protected him," Morris said bluntly. "I pulled his file while you were driving over. This isn't his first complaint for racial profiling. It's not even his 5th. But each time he got a slap on the wrist, some additional training, and went right back to the street." Maya's anger, which had been simmering just below the surface, flared hot. "Then why is he still wearing our uniform? Why wasn't he fired years ago?" "Because complaints from civilians are easy to dismiss as misunderstandings or exaggerations. Because the union protects bad cops almost as much as it protects good ones. Because proving racial bias is harder than you'd think, especially when the officer knows how to phrase things just right in his reports." Morris paused, meeting her eyes. "But this time is different, Maya. This time he didn't profile a civilian. He profiled and assaulted a decorated detective. That's going to be much harder to sweep under the rug." "I don't want this swept under anything," Maya said firmly. "I want accountability. I want him fired, and I want it on the record so he can't just slide into another department in another county." "That's what I want too," Morris assured her. "And I'm going to make sure Internal Affairs does this investigation right. But Maya, you need to prepare yourself for the blowback. There are going to be officers who see this as you betraying the thin blue line. There are going to be people who say you should have identified yourself immediately, that you provoked the confrontation." "I gave him every chance to back down," Maya protested. "I was polite, cooperative within legal bounds, and completely non-threatening. What more was I supposed to do? Apologize for existing while black?" "Nothing," Morris said gently. "You did everything right. But that won't stop people from trying to spin this differently. You know how it works. We've both seen good officers get crucified in the court of public opinion, while bad ones get defended by people more interested in protecting the institution than protecting the truth." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Captain, my grandmother is 83 years old. She's in a nursing home, and most days she doesn't remember my name. But do you know what she does remember? She remembers being beaten by police officers during a sit-in in Birmingham in 1963. She remembers watching her friends being hosed down and attacked by dogs. She remembers being told she was less than human by people in uniforms who were supposed to protect her. She opened her eyes and Morris could see the determination burning there. I became a cop because I thought I could be different. I thought I could be the kind of officer my grandmother never had, someone who would actually protect and serve everyone, not just people who looked like the majority. And most days, I think I succeed at that. But if I let this go, if I don't fight this with everything I have, then what message does that send? That it's okay to treat people this way as long as they can't fight back? That the only reason Dawson is in trouble is because he picked the wrong victim? Morris nodded slowly. You're right, of course. This is about more than just you, more than just Dawson. It's about setting a precedent, about showing that this behavior has consequences no matter who the victim is. He pulled out a formal complaint form. Let's get your statement on record. Tell me everything from the moment you walked into that bank. For the next 2 hours, Maya walked through every detail of the incident. Morris took meticulous notes, occasionally stopping her to clarify a point or ask for more specifics. They reviewed the timeline, the exact words used, the physical contact, and Maya's responses at each stage. It was exhausting, having to relive the incident in such granular detail, but Maya understood the necessity. This statement would form the foundation of the internal affairs investigation. When they finally finished, Morris set down his pen and rubbed his eyes tiredly. This is solid, Maya. Between your statement, the witness accounts, the security footage, and Martinez's acknowledgement that Dawson was out of line, IA should have everything they need for disciplinary action. Should have, Maya repeated. But will they actually use it? I'm going to make damn sure they do, Morris promised. I'm also going to recommend that this case be reviewed by the Chief's office directly. This kind of conduct from a senior officer, especially one with a history of complaints, needs to be addressed at the highest levels. There was a knock on the door, and Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from Internal Affairs entered. She was a white woman in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for thoroughness that had earned her respect across the department regardless of her findings. Captain Morris, Detective Richardson, she greeted them formally. I've been assigned to investigate this morning's incident. Detective Richardson, I've read your preliminary statement and I need to conduct a formal interview. Are you willing to cooperate? Of course, Maya said, straightening in her chair. I want this investigation to be as thorough as possible. Mitchell pulled out a recording device. This interview will be recorded and transcribed. You have the right to have union representation present if you wish. I don't need representation, Maya said. I have nothing to hide. The interview that followed was even more detailed than her conversation with Morris had been. Mitchell was precise in her questions, leaving no room for ambiguity or assumption. She asked about Maya's state of mind, her intentions in not immediately identifying herself as an officer, her assessment of Dawson's behavior, and her physical and emotional state throughout the encounter. Detective Richardson, Mitchell said at one point, some might argue that if you had simply shown your badge immediately, this entire situation could have been avoided. How do you respond to that? Maya met her gaze steadily. I respond by saying that I shouldn't have to prove my right to exist in a public space. I was a customer conducting legal business. Officer Dawson had no probable cause to detain me, question me, or demand my identification. The fact that I'm a police officer is irrelevant to the unlawfulness of his actions. If anything, it makes them worse, because it shows a fundamental failure to understand the constitutional rights he swore to protect." Mitchell nodded, making a note. "And when he put his hands on you, why didn't you physically resist or restrain him? You're trained in defensive tactics, and you would have been within your rights to protect yourself." "Because I'm also trained in de-escalation," Maya replied. "Because I understood that any physical response from me would have been used to justify his actions after the fact. Because I'm a black woman, and I know that fighting back, even in self-defense, can get me killed. I made a calculated decision to document his unlawful behavior through clear verbal statements, rather than give him any excuse to escalate to violence." Mitchell's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That was probably the right call, Detective. For the record, I want you to know that based on the evidence I've reviewed so far, I believe Officer Dawson violated department policy, state law, and your civil rights. This investigation will reflect that." The interview concluded shortly after noon. Maya was emotionally drained, hungry and desperate for some distance from the entire situation. But as she left Morris's office, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Detective Richardson," she answered professionally. "Detective, this is Amanda Chen from Channel 4 News. I understand you were involved in an incident at First National Bank this morning. Would you be willing to comment on what happened?" Maya's stomach sank. The media had already gotten wind of the story. "No comment at this time," she said firmly, ending the call. Before she could pocket her phone, it rang again. Another reporter, then another. Word was spreading fast, probably leaked by someone at the bank or one of the witnesses who'd been willing to give statements. She made it to her car before her phone rang yet again. This time, it was Aisha. "Don't say no comment to me," her friend said before Maya could even speak. "I saw the news. They're saying an off-duty detective was racially profiled by a fellow officer. Maya, are you okay? Do you need me?" The genuine concern in Aisha's voice nearly broke through Maya's professional composure. "I'm okay, Aisha. Tired, angry, but okay. I just want to go home and pretend this day didn't happen." "Come to my place instead," Aisha insisted. "Marcus is working late, so I've got the house to myself. We can order Thai food, drink wine, and you can tell me everything or nothing, whatever you need." Maya felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, the first real emotion she'd allowed herself to feel since the incident. "Yeah, okay. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Aisha's house in the Virginia Highland neighborhood was a sanctuary. She and her husband Marcus, a civil rights attorney, had bought the 1920s bungalow 5 years ago and slowly restored it to its original charm. Maya had spent countless evenings on their back porch, talking through difficult cases, celebrating victories, and finding solace after defeats. Aisha met her at the door with a hug that Maya hadn't realized she desperately needed. No words, just the solid comfort of a friend who had known her since their freshman year at Spelman College, who had celebrated with her when she graduated from the police academy, and who had held her hand through every difficult moment since. They settled onto the back porch with glasses of wine and the remains of a container of pad thai. Maya told Aisha everything, from the moment she'd walked into the bank to the media calls that had started flooding her phone. "You know Marcus is going to want to represent you if you decide to file a civil suit," Aisha said when Maya finished. "This is exactly the kind of case he lives for." "I don't know if I want to go that route," Maya admitted. "I just want Dawson held accountable within the department. A civil suit would drag this out for years, turn it into a circus." "Maybe," Aisha agreed. "But it would also create a public record, set a precedent, maybe prevent this from happening to someone else. Think about it, at least." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. Finally, Aisha spoke again. "Remember when we were at Spelman, and you told me you wanted to be a cop? I thought you were crazy. Everyone thought you were crazy. Here you were, a brilliant young black woman with opportunities to do anything, and you chose to join a system that has historically oppressed people who look like us." "I remember," Maya said quietly. "You asked me why I wanted to be part of the problem instead of fighting against it. And you said you wanted to be part of the solution from the inside," Aisha continued. "You said someone had to do it, and it might as well be you. I still didn't get it, not really, but I supported you because you're my sister, and I love you." She turned to face Maya directly. "But today, Maya, today I get it, because what you did in that bank, that took more courage than pulling a gun or making a dramatic arrest. You stood your ground, you documented the injustice, and you're holding the system accountable from within. That's the kind of change that actually matters." Maya felt the tears she'd been holding back all day finally spill over. "It doesn't feel like courage, Aisha. It feels like I'm just tired of fighting, tired of proving myself, tired of being seen as a threat just for existing." "That's why it is courage," Aisha said gently. "Because you do it even when you're tired. Because you keep showing up, keep fighting, even when it would be easier to walk away." They talked long into the evening, eventually moving on to lighter topics, reminiscing about college, discussing Aisha's work at the hospital, planning a girls' trip they'd been promising themselves for 2 years. By the time Maya left, well after midnight, she felt more centered, more ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, Maya's phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Captain Morris. "Maya, I'm sorry to call so early, but you need to turn on Channel 4. The story broke." She fumbled for her remote, still half asleep, and turned on the news. Her stomach dropped as she saw the headline, "APD detective racially profiled by fellow officer in bank confrontation." The reporter, the same Amanda Chen, who had called her yesterday, was standing outside the First National Bank. What was supposed to be a routine banking transaction turned into a shocking case of alleged racial profiling when off-duty Detective Maya Richardson of the Atlanta Police Department was detained and nearly arrested by Officer Robert Dawson, a 20-year veteran of the force. According to multiple witnesses, Officer Dawson approached Detective Richardson without cause, demanded identification, and physically grabbed her before she revealed her badge and rank. The incident was captured on the bank's security cameras and partially recorded by a witness. The screen cut to an interview with the elderly woman from the bank. "It was disgraceful," she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "That young woman was just doing her banking like the rest of us, and that officer singled her out for no reason other than the color of her skin. In this day and age, in this city, it's absolutely unacceptable." Then the businessman appeared, his phone footage playing on the screen. The quality wasn't great, but it clearly showed Dawson grabbing Maya's arm and her calm response, identifying herself as a detective. Detective Richardson is an 8-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department with numerous commendations for her work in major crimes, Amanda Chen continued. Officer Dawson has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal affairs investigation. We reached out to Detective Richardson for comment, but she declined to speak with us. The Atlanta Police Department released this statement. Chief of Police William Davidson appeared on screen, his expression grave. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously, particularly those involving potential civil rights violations. This incident is under active investigation by our Internal Affairs Division, and appropriate action will be taken based on the findings. I want to assure the public that the Atlanta Police Department is committed to serving all members of our community with professionalism, respect, and equality. Maya's phone started ringing almost immediately. She ignored the calls from unknown numbers, knowing they were likely reporters. But when she saw Lieutenant Mitchell's name, she answered. "Detective Richardson, I wanted to give you a heads up. The media attention on this case means it's going to be fast-tracked. We're completing our investigation today, and the findings will go to the chief by end of business tomorrow. I also wanted to let you know that we've discovered Officer Dawson has 12 previous complaints for racial profiling in his personnel file. None were sustained because they all involved civilians, and there wasn't enough evidence to contradict his reports. Your case changes that equation significantly." 12 complaints, Maya repeated, feeling sick. How many people did he harass? How many lives did he make harder, all because no one held him accountable? "That's the question the chief is asking too," Mitchell said. "For what it's worth, Detective, I think this case is going to result in some significant policy changes. You standing up might prevent future officers from getting away with this behavior." After the call ended, Maya sat in her quiet apartment, coffee growing cold in her hands, and thought about those 12 complaints. 12 people who had been brave enough to come forward to report misconduct, only to have their voices dismissed. How many others had stayed silent, knowing their word wouldn't be believed against an officer's? Her phone buzzed with a text from her partner, James. "Press conference at 10 a.m. Chief wants you there if you're willing. No pressure, but he thinks your presence would send a strong message." Maya's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want to be a symbol or a spokesperson. She just wanted to do her job. But then she thought about those 12 complaints, about every person who had been profiled and dismissed, about her grandmother and the Birmingham police who had beaten her for demanding basic human rights. She texted back, "I'll be there." The press conference was held at police headquarters, in a room packed with reporters, cameras and bright lights. Chief Davidson stood at the podium, with Captain Morris on his right and Maya on his left. She'd worn her dress uniform, every ribbon and commendation on display, her badge polished to a mirror shine. The chief's statement was brief but powerful. He outlined the facts of the incident without naming Dawson directly, acknowledged the department's failure to address the officer's pattern of behavior, and announced immediate policy changes. All complaints of racial profiling would now trigger automatic review by Internal Affairs. Officers with multiple complaints would be required to undergo comprehensive bias training and psychological evaluation. And critically, civilian complaints would be given equal weight to officer testimony in investigations. Then he turned to Maya. "Detective Richardson has asked to make a brief statement." Maya stepped to the podium, her heart pounding. She'd prepared some remarks the night before, but standing here in front of dozens of cameras, representing not just herself, but everyone who had ever been profiled and dismissed, the words she'd planned seemed inadequate. She took a breath and spoke from her heart. "My name is Detective Maya Richardson. I've served the city of Atlanta for 8 years. And I became a police officer because I believe in justice, in service, and in the possibility that our institutions can and should protect everyone equally. What happened to me at First National Bank 2 days ago was wrong. It was a violation of my rights, my dignity, and the oath that every officer takes to serve and protect all citizens." She paused, meeting the eyes of the reporters in the front row. "But I want to be clear about something. What happened to me was not unique. I have the privilege of a badge, of legal knowledge, of resources and support that many victims of racial profiling don't have. For every person like me who can fight back, there are dozens or hundreds who can't, who don't have the education to know their rights are being violated, who don't have the social capital to be believed when they file complaints, who don't have the financial resources to pursue justice." Maya's voice grew stronger. "This isn't about one bad officer. This is about a system that has, for too long, protected officers who abuse their authority while dismissing the voices of the communities they're supposed to serve. The 12 previous complaints against the officer who profiled me should have been enough to remove him from the streets. They weren't, because those complainants were civilians, and their words were valued less than an officer's denial. She looked directly into the main camera. To everyone who has ever been stopped, questioned, harassed, or worse, simply because of the color of your skin, I see you. I believe you. And I'm committed to using my position within this department to fight for the changes we desperately need. This incident doesn't end with disciplinary action against one officer. It has to be the beginning of real, systemic reform. The room erupted with questions as Maya stepped back from the podium, but Chief Davidson held up his hand. We'll take a few questions, but Detective Richardson has been through enough this week. Please be respectful of that. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution stood. Detective Richardson, do you plan to file a civil lawsuit against Officer Dawson or the department? I'm focused right now on the internal affairs investigation and on returning to my work in major crimes, Maya answered. Any decisions about further legal action will come later. Another reporter called out. Chief Davidson, what consequences will Officer Dawson face? That decision will be made based on the findings of the IA investigation, the chief replied. But I can tell you that we're treating this with the utmost seriousness. If the investigation confirms what the evidence suggests, termination is very much on the table. A third reporter from a local black news outlet addressed Maya directly. Detective, some people might say you should have just shown your badge immediately and avoided the whole situation. What's your response to that? Maya had been expecting this question. My response is that I shouldn't have to prove my humanity or my right to exist in public spaces. Being a police officer doesn't change the fact that I'm a black woman in America, and it doesn't protect me from the biases and prejudices that too many people in positions of authority carry with them. I could have shown my badge immediately, yes, but that wouldn't have addressed the fundamental problem, which is that Officer Dawson saw me as suspicious solely because of my race. The next person he profiles might not have a badge to protect them. The press conference lasted another 20 minutes, with questions ranging from thoughtful to inflammatory. Maya handled each one with the same calm professionalism she'd shown in the bank, refusing to be baited into anger or defensive responses. When it was finally over, Morris walked her back to his office. You did good out there, Maya. Really good. The chief was impressed. I meant every word, Maya said. If something good is going to come out of this nightmare, it needs to be real change, not just damage control. I think you're going to get your wish, Morris said. The chief called me before the press conference. He wants to create a task force on bias and accountability, and he wants you to be part of it. Maya stopped walking. Me? Captain, I'm a detective. I investigate crimes. I don't create policy. You're also someone who just demonstrated that you understand both the street-level realities of policing and the systemic issues that need to be addressed, Morris countered. Besides, who better to design reforms than someone who's lived through the failures of the current system? It was a lot to process. Maya had never seen herself as a reformer or an activist. She was a cop, someone who worked cases and caught bad guys. But maybe that was exactly the perspective that was needed, someone who understood the job from the inside, but was willing to acknowledge its flaws. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Take a few days, get back to your regular work, clear your head. But Maya, this could be your chance to make a real difference, to be part of creating the department you wish you'd joined 8 years ago. Maya returned to work the following Monday to a complicated reception. Some of her colleagues greeted her with supportive words and pats on the shoulder. Others avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the attention the incident had brought to the department. And a few, including Officer Rick Patterson from the Patrol Division, made their disapproval clear. "Heard you made quite the scene at that bank," Patterson said in the break room, his tone making it clear it wasn't a compliment. "Some of us think you could have handled it differently." Maya poured her coffee slowly, using the time to control her response. "And some of us think officers shouldn't racially profile people. But here we are." "Dawson was just doing his job," Patterson shot back. "He didn't know you were a cop." "He had no reason to question me at all," Maya replied evenly. "I was a customer conducting legal business. The fact that he singled me out without cause is the entire problem, Rick. Or are you suggesting that being black in a bank is inherently suspicious?" Patterson's face reddened. "That's not what I said." "Then what are you saying?" Maya challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're defending racial profiling as long as the officer doesn't know he's profiling another cop." James Chen appeared in the doorway, his timing impeccable as always. "Richardson, Captain wants to see us. We caught a new case." Maya grabbed her coffee and followed her partner out, leaving Patterson sputtering behind them. "Thanks for the save," she murmured as they walked toward Morris's office. "Any time," James replied. "For what it's worth, most of us in major crimes are on your side. What Dawson did was inexcusable, and everyone knows it. The new case was a home invasion in Buckhead that had escalated to assault. It was the kind of work Maya had joined the force to do, the puzzle-solving and justice-seeking that made the job meaningful. For the next few days, she threw herself into the investigation, grateful for the distraction and the reminder of why she'd chosen this career path. But the Dawson incident continued to follow her. The Internal Affairs investigation concluded with a recommendation for termination based on the preponderance of evidence showing a pattern of racial bias and misconduct. Dawson's union immediately filed a grievance, claiming he was being made a scapegoat for political reasons. The case would likely drag on for months in arbitration. Meanwhile, the policy changes Chief Davidson had announced began to take shape. Maya found herself pulled into meetings with the chief's task force, offering her perspective on training protocols, complaint investigation procedures, and community relations. It was frustrating work, full of bureaucracy and resistance from officers who saw any reform as an attack on law enforcement. But slowly, incrementally, things began to change. 3 months after the bank incident, Maya was working late at her desk when Martinez, the young officer who had been with Dawson that day, appeared at her office door. "Detective Richardson, do you have a minute?" Maya gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Come in, Officer Martinez." He sat down, clearly nervous. "I wanted to apologize to you. I should have done more that day at the bank. I knew Dawson was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to really stand up to him. I told myself I tried, that I suggested we leave, but I could have done more. I should have done more." Maya studied him for a moment. "You're right. You should have. But I also understand the position you were in. He was your senior officer, your training partner. Going against him meant risking your career, your relationships in the department. That doesn't excuse it, but I understand it." "I put in for a transfer after that day," Martinez continued. "I couldn't keep working with officers who thought what Dawson did was acceptable. I'm starting in community policing next month." "That's good," Maya said sincerely. "We need more officers in that division who understand the importance of building trust with the communities we serve." Martinez stood to leave, then paused. "Detective, I've been following the changes you've been pushing for on the chief's task force. A lot of the younger officers, we appreciate what you're doing. It's not easy being the one speaking up, but it matters. Please don't give up on it." After he left, Maya sat alone in her office, looking at the commendation on her wall from a case she'd solved her first year in major crimes. It seemed like a lifetime ago, that eager young detective who thought she could change the world one case at a time. She still believed in that work. in the importance of solving crimes and seeking justice for victims. But the bank incident had opened her eyes to a different kind of justice work, the slow, grinding effort of changing systems and institutions from within. Her phone buzzed with a message from Aisha. "Dinner at our place Sunday? Marcus wants to run some ideas past you for a civil rights training program he's developing." Maya smiled and typed back her acceptance. Then she pulled up the latest draft of the new complaint investigation protocol she'd been working on for the task force. It wasn't glamorous work, and the changes wouldn't happen overnight, but every policy revised, every training module updated, every procedure reformed was a step toward the department she wanted to be part of. 6 months after the incident, on a mild March morning, Maya received a call from Lieutenant Mitchell. "Detective Richardson, I wanted you to hear this from me first. Officer Dawson has accepted a settlement. He's retiring immediately, forfeiting his pension, and agreeing not to work in law enforcement again. In exchange, the department is dropping the termination proceedings." Maya's first reaction was anger. He gets to walk away? After everything he did? After all those complaints against him, he just gets to retire? "I understand your frustration," Mitchell said calmly, "but this outcome guarantees he'll never wear a badge again. If we'd continued with termination proceedings, his union might have fought it for years. He might have won reinstatement. This way, he's done. Permanently." Maya took a breath, forcing herself to think strategically rather than emotionally. Mitchell was right. The goal wasn't punishment for punishment's sake. It was protecting future potential victims from Dawson's prejudice. "Okay," she said finally, "I can live with that outcome." "There's more," Mitchell continued. "The department is issuing a formal apology to you, and they're establishing a fund using part of Dawson's forfeited pension to support community organizations working on police accountability and racial justice. The chief wants you to help determine which organizations should receive funding." That was unexpected. Maya felt some of her anger dissipating, replaced by cautious hope. "He really is serious about reform, isn't he?" "He is," Mitchell confirmed, "and between you and me, a lot of that is because of you. You could have let this go, could have accepted that you had your badge to protect you and moved on. Instead, you fought for everyone who doesn't have that protection. That took guts, and it's making a difference." After the call ended, Maya walked to the window of her office, looking out over the city she'd sworn to serve and protect. The afternoon sun was painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere out there, people were going about their lives, most of them never thinking about the systems and institutions that were supposed to keep them safe. Her phone rang again. This time, it was her grandmother's nursing home. "Ms. Richardson, I wanted to let you know that your grandmother is having one of her good days. She's been asking for you." Maya grabbed her jacket. The case files could wait. She drove to the nursing home, her mind full of everything that had happened over the past 6 months, all the changes that had come from that one morning at the bank. Evelyn was sitting in her wheelchair by the window of her room, her silver hair neatly braided, her eyes clearer than they'd been in months. When Maya entered, her grandmother's face lit up with recognition. "Maya, baby girl, come sit with me." Maya pulled up a chair and took her grandmother's hand, the skin paper-thin and soft. "I saw you on the TV," Evelyn said, and Maya realized with surprise that her grandmother had somehow seen or understood the news coverage. My grandbaby, standing up to them just like we did back in Birmingham. "I learned from the best, Grandma," Maya said gently. Evelyn squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Those men with their badges and their guns, they thought they could break us, thought they could beat us down until we stayed quiet. But we didn't stay quiet. We stood up, we spoke out, and slowly, so slowly, things changed." She looked directly at Maya, and in that moment she was completely present, completely herself. Things are still changing, baby, and you're part of that change. Don't you ever forget that what you do matters. Not just the criminals you catch, but the way you do it, the example you set, the stand you take. Maya felt tears streaming down her face. It's hard, Grandma. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making any real difference. That's because the work is slow, Evelyn said wisely. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, in individual stands, in people like you refusing to accept that things have to stay the way they've always been. You planted seeds that day at the bank, Maya. Some of them are already growing. They sat together for over an hour, talking and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. When Maya finally left, promising to return soon, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. A sense of peace about her choices, about the path she'd taken. A year after the bank incident, Maya stood in front of a room full of new recruits at the police academy. Captain Morris had asked her to speak about integrity, accountability, and what it meant to serve all members of the community. She looked at the faces before her, a diverse group of young people who had chosen to become police officers for reasons as varied as their backgrounds. Some would become excellent officers, dedicated to justice and service. Others would wash out or be weeded out during training, and a few, unfortunately, would become the kind of officer she'd had to fight against. "A year ago," she began, "I walked into a bank on my day off to handle some personal business. What happened next changed my career, and I hope made a small but meaningful change in this department. I'm going to tell you that story, not because it shows me as a hero, but because it illustrates something essential about the job you've chosen." She told them about Dawson, about his assumptions and his abuse of authority. She told them about her decision to stand her ground, to document the violation rather than immediately pulling rank. And she told them about the aftermath, the investigation, the policy changes, and the ongoing work of reform. "Here's what I need you to understand," she said, wrapping up. "The badge you'll wear when you graduate isn't just a symbol of authority. It's a symbol of trust. The community is trusting you to protect them, to serve them, to uphold their rights, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. And your fellow officers are trusting you to hold yourselves and each other to the highest standards." She paused, making eye contact with as many of the recruits as she could. Officer Martinez, who was with Dawson that day, told me later that he knew what was happening was wrong, but he didn't feel he could speak up. That's the culture we're trying to change. When you see a fellow officer violating someone's rights, when you see bias or prejudice or abuse of authority, you have to have the courage to intervene, not just for the victim, but for the integrity of the entire profession. A young black woman in the front row raised her hand. "Detective Richardson, do you think things have really changed? Or was your incident just a headline that people will forget about?" It was a good question, one Maya had asked herself many times. "I think change is incremental and ongoing," she answered honestly. "The policy reforms that came out of my case are real, and they're making a difference. But policies alone aren't enough. Culture changes one officer at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of courage at a time. Whether my incident becomes just a headline or a turning point depends on all of us, on whether we commit every day to being the officers our community deserves." After the presentation, several recruits approached her with questions. The young black woman from the front row, whose name was Jessica, hung back until the others had left. "Detective Richardson, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret becoming a cop? Knowing what you know now, seeing how hard it is to change things, would you make a different choice?" Maya considered the question carefully. It deserved an honest answer. "There are days when it's difficult, when I wonder if I could make more of a difference doing something else. But then I think about the cases I've solved, the victims I've helped get justice, the policy changes I've been able to influence from the inside. Could I have done those things from outside the system? Maybe some of them, but being part of the system, understanding it from the inside, that gives me a kind of credibility and access that outsiders don't have. She smiled at Jessica. The work isn't easy, and there are days when you'll question everything. But if you're asking me whether it's worth it, whether one person really can make a difference, my answer is yes. Absolutely yes. 2 years after the bank incident, Maya was promoted to lieutenant and appointed as the head of a new community relations and accountability division. It was a role that combined investigation, policy development, and community outreach, everything she'd learned to value over her decade with the department. On her first day in the new position, she found a card on her desk. It was from Officer Martinez, now a well-respected community policing officer. "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like," it read, "and thank you for not giving up on us." Maya pinned the card to her bulletin board, right next to a photo of her grandmother from the Birmingham marches, young and fierce and unafraid. 2 generations of fighting for justice, 2 different approaches to the same fundamental goal, making sure that everyone, regardless of the color of their skin, was treated with dignity and respect. The work was far from over. There would be more incidents, more officers who let their biases override their training, more fights for accountability and reform. But as Maya looked around her new office, at the team she'd been given to help build a better department, she felt something she hadn't felt that morning in the bank. Hope. Real, grounded hope, based not on idealism, but on evidence, on the changes she'd already helped create, on the young officers like Jessica and Martinez, who were coming up through the ranks with a different understanding of what it meant to serve and protect. Her phone rang. It was James Chen, still her partner on major cases, even though she'd moved into leadership. "Lieutenant Richardson," he said with mock formality, "we've got a situation that needs your expertise. Family dispute that's escalating. Community is asking for you specifically." Maya grabbed her jacket. "On my way." As she headed out, she passed a mirror in the hallway and caught a glimpse of herself. Lieutenant Maya Richardson, a black woman in a position of authority in a system that had too often failed people who looked like her. She thought about that morning at the bank, about Officer Dawson's assumption that she didn't belong, about the long road from that moment to this one. She thought about her grandmother's words. "You planted seeds that day, Maya. Some of them are already growing." And she walked out into the Atlanta afternoon, ready to do the work, to fight the fights, to plant more seeds and tend to the ones already growing. Because that's what change required, not dramatic moments or headlines, but the steady, daily commitment to being better, demanding better, and creating a system worthy of the community it served. The bank incident had been a catalyst, a moment that crystallized years of frustration and determination into action. But it wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where she had the authority and the platform to make real, lasting change. And as she drove through the city she loved, toward a community that needed her, Maya Richardson knew that every difficult moment had been worth it. Every fight for accountability and justice had mattered. Every seed she'd planted was growing into something bigger than herself. The work continued. It would always continue. But for the first time since that September morning 2 years ago, Maya felt not just the weight of the responsibility, but the strength to carry it, and the hope that it would lead to something better, for her department, and for every person who deserved to walk into a bank or down a street or through their own neighborhood without fear of being judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. She thought of her grandmother one more time, of all the women who had fought before her, and she whispered a promise into the Atlanta air. "I won't give up. I'll keep fighting. I'll keep making it better." And she would. One day, one case, one policy, one changed mind at a time. That was the real story, not just of one confrontation in a bank, but of the long, difficult, essential work of creating justice in an imperfect world. It wasn't always dramatic, it wasn't always recognized, but it was always worth doing. Maya turned onto the street where the family dispute was unfolding, ready to do what she did best: listen, understand, de-escalate, and serve. Because that's what real policing looked like when it was done right, with compassion and professionalism and a deep commitment to the humanity of every person involved. The seeds she'd planted were growing, and she would keep planting more, keep nurturing them, keep believing that a better department, a better system, a better world was possible, because her grandmother had taught her that belief wasn't naive, it was necessary, and it was powerful. And Maya Richardson, lieutenant in the Atlanta Police Department, would carry that belief forward every single day, in every interaction, in every decision, in every moment, when she had the choice to make things better or accept them as they were. She chose better. She would always choose better. That was her promise, her purpose, and her power. And nothing, not prejudice, not resistance, not even exhaustion, would make her break it.